Good afternoon. I'm David Chappell. Welcome to this session on Azure and its competitors. It's great to be here. Thank you. It's great to be here. So I want to say two things before we get started. Number one, please notice that I do not work for Microsoft. So do not think anything I say here this afternoon represents the official Microsoft view on anything. It does not. This is my perspective and mine only. I do not speak for Microsoft, clearly. Second, notice the subtitle. The subtitle is The Big Picture. I am not going to do feature comparisons in this talk. I'm not going to compare how Azure supports this versus Amazon's support for features. No, I'm not, and here's why. It's because in my experience, people who want to think about comparisons between technologies are doing so primarily to make a decision, to decide which one to work with. And the truth is, making that choice based on features with cloud platforms makes no sense. It makes no sense because what we're seeing is this constant leapfrogging, where Azure has something and Amazon does not, then Amazon goes ahead, then Azure matches up. In general, feature advantages are ephemeral. Now, not always. Sometimes you want to build an app right now, and the app requires some unique thing that's only in one platform. For example, if right now you want to build an app or move an app from on-prem to cloud, and that app requires, say, nested VMs, hosting VMs inside cloud VMs. Only Azure supports that today, I believe. And so for right now, you might choose that for that application. But in general, what you are doing here is making a really important choice. Choosing a cloud platform is not trivial, and it's not a short-term decision. It's much closer to a marriage. You're going to wind up with a long-term link here. And so you don't want to make those kinds of decisions based just on short-term feature advantages, like a marriage. You know, if my wife had married me 30 years ago because of my full head of hair, that would have been a problem, right? You want to make decisions like that based on shared values, shared strategies, shared goals, those kinds of large things. Choosing a cloud platform is very similar. It really is. So to help understand or get across why I believe this is so important, let's start by talking about how things have been. The traditional platform for enterprise IT looked like this. The clients were PCs, and then all of us, all of you probably, unless you work for a startup, had some on-premises data center infrastructure, servers, operating systems, whatever, on which you run packaged applications, SAP, Oracle, Exchange, whatever, okay, and you build custom apps in .NET, in Java, other things. That has been the conventional world. That has been the default platform. That has been the thing on which you built new stuff by default. But that's over. This is no longer the default platform. No startup would ever do this today. Right? You go to a venture capitalist and ask for money for servers, they will laugh you out of the room. No startup would do this, right? The reality is there is a new default platform, and it looks like this. Obviously, clients have expanded. They're now PCs, tablets, phones, more. Just as important, on-premises applications, on-premises packaged apps have moved into SaaS. Tell me, in your company, in your organization, when you buy a new packaged app, do you actually go look first for on-premises apps? I hope not. I hope you look first for SaaS, because that is so clearly the direction our world is going in. It's also the case that custom apps, by default, in more and more organizations, are now built not on premises, but on cloud platforms. So let's think about this for a minute. What is it that gives your organization competitive advantage? Is it packaged apps? Probably not. Because your competitors can buy those same apps, right? What gives you competitive advantage, differentiation, is custom apps. And those custom apps, increasingly, are being built by default on public cloud platforms. That means that public cloud platforms are now the foundation for competitive advantage. This is not a small decision. We are seeing this enormous transformation from the old world to the new. It's a big change. So, I'm going to talk about those public cloud platforms. Before we do, however, I'm going to do the world's fastest tutorial on public cloud technology. And the reason is that this is a 200-level session, and I want to lose nobody. So, in a very simple nutshell, you can think of cloud platform technologies in 3 big buckets. Bucket 1 is compute, which lets you run new applications and, in some scenarios, lets you move on-prem stuff into the cloud. The second is data, which lets you store and access information, analyze information. The third is everything else: identity, machine learning, IoT, media, all that stuff. I'm going to talk in this presentation about the first 2 buckets. Why? Because if I do everything, we'd be here for hours. And just as important, compute and data are where most of the money is today. The majority of revenue in cloud platforms today is in those first 2 buckets. In other words, it's what you most care about, what you spend the most on. So I'm going to focus on those parts of this large technology space. Let's look at compute. In the beginning, there was IaaS, right? Infrastructure as a service was the first really compute-oriented technology in the cloud. Simple idea: go to a website, ask for VMs. They get created from VM images, Windows or Linux. Wonderful. IaaS, been around for a long time. Now, though, the focus is moving from VMs to containers, and so cloud platforms have also added various ways to do containers as a service. The notion there is the service lets you deploy and manage containers inside VMs. This is often called container orchestration. Moving one level up, there's this thing called PaaS, platform as a service, where you still are running your applications in VMs. You're always running in VMs. But now you just provide applications that run on supporting services. You don't typically see the VMs at all. You just say, cloud platform, here's my app, run my app. And the fourth and newest approach to cloud compute, I'm going to refer to as functions as a service, FaaS, but it's more often called serverless. I'm going to use that FaaS terminology because it makes my naming consistent across everything, which I like. But people call it serverless more often. All right. Here, the notion is that you just write and invoke functions in the cloud. There's still VMs, maybe containers beneath you, but you can't see that stuff. You're in your browser or somewhere else, you write some code, an event happens, like a user request or a file change to a database, and the function runs. Great. 4 approaches to compute that are relevant today in cloud computing, cloud platforms. For data, oh man, this is a huge space potentially. I'm going to look at just the 3 big areas. The first is officially called object storage. Do not be confused. All this means is storing big chunks of binary data. It has nothing to do with objects in programming languages or object databases from the past. It's just called object storage for reasons I don't understand. It just means storing big chunks of binary data. There's also relational, of course, and be clear here, I'm not talking about running a relational database like SQL Server or Oracle or MySQL in a VM in the cloud. No, I'm talking about an actual managed service, effectively PaaS for data, that provides relational data management. And the last category is NoSQL, the world of non-relational databases. So, I'm going to create a grid here, and I'm going to walk through this grid and talk about the vendors and a bit about their technologies. The columns of the grid are what I just showed you. The 4 compute styles, IaaS, CaaS, PaaS, FaaS, serverless, and the data styles, Object storage, relational, NoSQL. The rows of the grid are vendors. Microsoft, of course, with Azure. Amazon Web Services, of course. Google Cloud Platform. And I'm going to talk about Force.com from Salesforce. Before I walk through this, some of you are thinking the following. You're thinking, well, wait a minute. David, you just said that we're creating this new default platform for our organization. Where are my familiar enterprise vendors? Where's IBM? Where's VMware? Why aren't they here? Why aren't you talking about them? Well, I will. I'll do a little bit about IBM and VMware at the end. But you know what? They're not in this big grid because I don't think they're important enough, significant enough, to qualify. There's a bunch of reasons for that, and I'll get to them later on. However, before we do that, let me talk about something else for a minute. It's Gartner Magic Quadrants. You probably have all seen Gartner MQs. Quick refresher here. There are two axes in this graph. Completeness of vision is horizontal. That means this is Gartner's assessment of how broad, how accurate, how beautiful your vision for the future is in this technology area. The vertical axis is ability to execute. Gartner's take on how well they think you can actually create the vision you have. And like all good MBAs, they have a 4-quadrant grid that they create. Depending on where you are in this grid, you have different names. If you're on the lower left, if your vision is lousy and you can't execute, you're called a niche player. That's a very diplomatic way to say it, you know? I always call that the loser's quadrant myself, right? Nobody wants to be there, right? If you are a challenger, then Gartner thinks you can execute, but your vision's not very good. If you're a visionary, then Gartner thinks that you've got great vision, but they doubt you can pull it off. Where you want to be, of course, is the quadrant where you have both of those things. You want to be the leader's quadrant. That, of course, is where vendors actually want to be. Okay? Now, for various reasons, I cannot show you the Gartner MQs. However, let's talk about them, because Gartner has a bunch of MQs related to public cloud platforms. The most important, I would argue, is the one for IaaS, that VMs on demand cloud compute operation. And the reason it's so important is because IaaS is so often the fundamental thing in a cloud platform. It's also the oldest of these. In the Gartner Magic Quadrant for cloud compute IaaS today, there are two leaders, Microsoft and Amazon. Amazon's a little bit ahead of Microsoft right now. Google, Gartner says, is a visionary, but they're hugging the line to leader. They've been that visionary quadrant for a while, not yet a leader. Everybody else, IBM, VMware, a bunch of others, are all down there in the niche players quadrant, the losers quadrant, sorry, except a few of them leak over into visionaries sometimes, or they're visionary for a year, then back to losers, right? Gartner also doesn't believe those guys seem to have much going on here. So, this is not just my perspective. This is widely shared among analysts in this space. And by the way, in public cloud platform MQs, they frequently have what I've come to think of as a leaders and losers structure. There'll be a few leaders and a bunch of losers, and almost nobody who is a visionary or a challenger. What this means, I would argue, is that public cloud platforms are more and more about scale. If you have the scale, you can be a leader. If you don't, you can't. So if you look at the MQs in a number of areas here, you'll see for public cloud platforms, they've got that leaders and losers structure. All right. And by the way, I really encourage you to read these documents, especially the one about IaaS. The Gartner IaaS MQ, that document, big thick thing, It's the best thing I know of to get a really good feel for the current state of this space. People who write that are really good, in my opinion. Let's start with Azure. You probably know a bunch of this, but let's just fill in all the gaps here. Azure's IaaS is called virtual machines. Azure's CAS service is called Azure Container Service. There's also Azure Container Instances, which lets you run individual containers. They've got a couple of PaaS services, App Service, Service Fabric, and their FaaS, their serverless technology, is called Azure Functions. Object storage is blobs. The relational store is SQL Database. And for NoSQL, there are a few different options. There are a few different choices. But the lead one, the most visible, the one they promote the most, is Cosmos DB. And by the way, if you're interested in the Microsoft story about data on Azure, for this and for analytical stuff and so on, I'm doing a talk tomorrow that walks through that whole part of the technology, the Azure Data Platform. All right, so this is Microsoft. Now, as you might know, Azure Virtual Machines let you create both Windows and Linux VMs. I don't know about you, but when I first saw this, when I first saw Microsoft telling me that they were doing open source and that they were committed to open source and they were happy to support Linux in Azure, I was deeply cynical. Were you cynical? I was deeply cynical because, come on, this is the company whose CEO not so long ago talked about open source and Linux as a cancer. Right? So I was really cynical. Today, though, I'm not so cynical because the scales have fallen from my eyes and the truth has become evident. The truth is this. The truth is that when you think about how software used to make money for companies, it looked like this. In the pre-cloud world, vendors ship software which their customers then run on their premises and for which those customers pay a one-time license fee. Maybe there's some maintenance, but the big money's the license fee. With this world, this model, the old way of doing software, open source was a huge threat to the vendor's revenue. Ballmer was right. Open source was a cancer in Microsoft's profit margins. But in the brave new world of cloud computing, it looks like this. In this world, the vendor runs the software in the cloud, providing a service to customers who then pay monthly, typically, for the service they get. In this world, which of course is where we're headed, open source is in no sense a threat to the vendor's revenue. Not at all. In fact, open source in this context helps the cloud vendor make more money because they have more services to offer and thus charge for, and maybe even they cost less to create because the vendor need not build all the software themselves. So supporting open source in Azure helps Microsoft make more money than they otherwise would. And I always trust Microsoft to do what will make them more money. Right? Don't you? All organizations, not just Microsoft, all of them. Right? So I am no longer cynical about Microsoft's support of open source. They're serious. And they're serious for good, sound business reasons on their part. Let's talk about Microsoft. Let's try to assess what they're doing here. They've got a very strong PaaS story. Microsoft's always been big on PaaS. In fact, back in 2009, when they first announced this stuff, they only had PaaS. It took Microsoft quite a while, on the order of years, to agree to do IaaS. And IaaS, of course, now is a big market, obviously. But Microsoft's been very focused on PaaS. Their PaaS story is strong between App Service and Service Fabric. Microsoft also has strong relationships. It's been an enterprise vendor for a long time. So it has strong relationships with all of your organizations, I am sure. This is a powerful thing in defining a new platform. And it's something that's fairly unique about Microsoft in terms of this history. One more unique aspect, and again, what I'm striving for here in this talk is the kinds of strategic things these platforms are doing that are different and are hard to change. not little feature things. Those are ephemeral. But basic strategies, directions, what they're doing are hard to change. Those, to me, are far more important than a head of hair. Microsoft also supports hybrid cloud. Big part of their story, right? That they have on-premises and public cloud in a unified way. At this event, they've finally released Azure Stack in general availability, so that's a big part of their story here. It's not surprising, again, because of the leading public cloud platform vendors, they are the only one that comes into this space with an on-premises installed base. It makes perfect sense that Microsoft would try to tie that to public cloud platforms. When I see people talk, however, about hybrid cloud, I get sort of annoyed sometimes, because people so often use the term hybrid cloud to mean whatever they want. It is, in fact, not this nebulous thing. It's useful, I think, to have some fairly concrete sense of what hybrid cloud means. And there's lots of ways one could do this, I suppose. But one that I find useful looks like this. Obviously, hybrid cloud needs to connect the cloud platform, public cloud, with the on-premises computing resources, obviously. And there are various ways, avenues, in which to do that. One of the most important, I would argue, is compute. Having a common, consistent application platform between public and on-premises. In the Azure world, for example, that's addressed by Azure and Azure Stack. Both of them support all four of the compute models I described earlier, IaaS, CaaS, PaaS, FaaS, in the same way. So it's portable. Apps are portable across those environments. A common data platform is also useful, having portability across both. In Azure, that's SQL database in the cloud, SQL Server on-prem. There's more than that. Those are some examples. You also might want to have common management, security across both these worlds. In the Azure world, that's a bunch of things. Azure Security Center, Azure Backup, Log Analytics, all these things work across on-prem and public cloud. And you also want common identity, letting you log in and authorize based on one identity for people in this whole environment. In Azure, that's Active Directory on-prem and Azure Active Directory in the cloud. Okay? So hybrid cloud need not be this nebulous idea. It actually can be defined fairly concretely. And it's a big part of Microsoft's strategy here. How about Amazon? As I said earlier, Amazon is currently the leader in the IaaS, Gartner IaaS MQ. Microsoft's a bit behind, not too far, but a bit behind. And Amazon's IaaS technology is called EC2, Elastic Compute Cloud. Their CaaS technology, EC2 Container Service, their PaaS technology, they don't call it that generally, but it is called Elastic Beanstalk. And I have to stop here for a minute. Elastic Beanstalk? Really? I mean, is this not the strangest technology you've ever heard? Elastic Beanstalk? I was very critical of names like this. However, I've sworn a holy oath to stop criticizing how vendors name their technologies. And the reason I've done that is that not too long ago, Microsoft actually hired me to help them name something. And within 20 minutes, I promised to never again criticize any vendor name. Because it turns out it's a really hard problem. All the good names are taken. All the bad names are taken. It's a really hard problem. So, Amazon, Elastic Beanstalk is a great name, right? I love that name. They also have Lambda. Lambda is their serverless technology. And don't be confused, this has nothing to do with the Lambda architecture for dealing with streaming data, for example. All the names are taken. We have to reuse things over and over. For object storage, they have S3. For relational service, they have RDS. This is interesting. RDS isn't exactly like SQL Database. SQL Database is a managed service that provides this service that's based on SQL Server. RDS provides a managed instance of SQL Server or some other database. It's a bit different. You might have noticed, however, that just yesterday, Microsoft announced for SQL Database an option called Managed Instance, which is much like RDS. So there's now a more direct competitor to RDS in the Microsoft world. And for NoSQL, AWS has various things. The primary thing they promote is DynamoDB. Okay? So, let's assess Amazon. Viewed as a leader in IaaS, as I said. Right? Traditionally not very PaaS-focused. Also, Amazon today, one more thing, not very PaaS-focused, but they are very serverless-focused today. And in many ways, you can think of serverless, FaaS, as just an evolution of PaaS, or a variety of PaaS. So Amazon was not traditionally PaaS-focused, but in the world of serverless, they're pushing that hard. Also, and this is, I think, interesting, Amazon today is a conglomerate. I mean, yeah, they're a retailer, they're a technology provider, and they're a lot more. I'm going to say more about that in just a minute. Amazon also, unlike Microsoft, is very public cloud focused. They want their customers to move into their environment. Again, not surprising. They don't start from the place of large installed base like Microsoft does. So, not surprising. Amazon talks about hybrid cloud sometimes, but they tend to mean something very different than Microsoft does. They tend to mean private clouds running up there in Azure. So, this is a really sharp difference in strategy between Azure and Amazon, one that is unlikely to change anytime soon. Now, watch Amazon announce something next week that makes me a liar. It's hard to know that stuff, right? But it seems like it's been an ongoing difference between these two vendors. Let me talk for a minute here about this notion of Amazon as a conglomerate. You ever done this? You ever sat down and thought about all of the businesses Amazon is in today? They're a retailer, obviously. They're in cloud platforms, obviously, because that's what we're here for right now. They also are in the video streaming business with Amazon Video. They do consumer electronics. Amazon Devices provides the Echo, and they've got the Fire tablets and so on. They bought Whole Foods, a brick-and-mortar grocer. Please raise your hand if you were not at all surprised when Amazon bought Whole Foods. Thank you. Right. I was stunned. It was amazing to see them do this. So unlike who they've been historically. Amazon Studios does film production, and there's a bunch more. Amazon Handmade competes with Etsy. Amazon Music competes with Apple Streaming. There are whole kinds of businesses here. Now, one point about this worth making is that it is deeply impressive because most conglomerates get that way through acquisition. Amazon built all these things. And that's so hard to do because when there's one big giant business like retail, that business sucks away most of the money and most of the smart people in the company. And so the other ones get strangled at birth. Jeff Bezos, their CEO, did not let that happen, which is remarkable. It's really remarkable. There is, however, another issue to think about here, which is that conglomerates in business history tend not to have a really great track record. There are a few exceptions, General Electric, but even they have spun some stuff off recently. And here's the reason. The biggest reason why, in the minds of business analysts apparently, is the following. It is that Amazon has lots of smart people. Bezos is very smart. The folks who work for him are very smart. Andy Jassy, who runs AWS, very smart guy. However, they are competing with the very smart management teams at a lot of other places. So, in retail, Amazon competes with Walmart, Target, Alibaba. In fact, that box should be huge. They compete with every retailer in the world, practically. In cloud platforms, with Microsoft, Google, IBM to some degree. In streaming, Netflix, Hulu, Vudu. In devices, Apple, Google, Samsung. You can see this goes on here. They now compete with Kroger and Safeway and Aldi, the German guys. And in films, they compete with Warner Brothers and Disney and Columbia, and there's a whole bunch more. Can Amazon's management team compete effectively and win in all these businesses? History suggests it's unlikely. So we'll see. Bezos' choice to turn them into a conglomerate is brave. How about Google? Google's technologies line up like this. Compute Engine is their IaaS technology. Container Engine for CAS. App Engine for PaaS. and Cloud Functions for FAS. Great. For object storage, you can see here cloud storage. For relational, they got a couple of options, Cloud SQL and Spanner. And for NoSQL, Cloud Data Store is the main choice. So again, they check all the boxes here. Great. Let's think about Google. Google has been very interesting in this market because they were really late. Here's what happened. They shipped their PaaS offering, App Engine, a long time ago. App Engine actually was available before Azure was announced, just a few months. Long time ago, they shipped App Engine. Then they did nothing. They just kind of sat there doing nothing for a long time. And relatively recently, they have begun to address more broadly the full suite of cloud platform technologies. So they are somewhat behind. Remember, in Gartner's MQ for IaaS, they're still a visionary, not breaking into the leaders quadrant yet. And so they appear to be serious about cloud platforms finally, but they're playing catch up. And everybody who looks at the space, it seems, still has some concerns about whether or not Google is really serious about this space. And here's part of why. Because if you're a business like Google, and the margins you're used to getting are the margins from search advertising, oh, those are beautiful, fat profit margins. Do you really want to enter the world of public cloud platforms and enterprise support and all that stuff with fierce competitors like Amazon and Microsoft? Can those margins possibly compare? We'll see. They've hired Diane Green, the VMware founder, who's clearly very enterprise focused. So Google is clearly trying to make a run at this here. But there are still questions, in some minds at least, about how serious they are. And Gartner, in the latest IaaS Cloud MQ, Gartner says that there are two big leaders, and that if you choose anybody else, you should carefully manage the risks of doing that, which is I was surprised to see Gartner say that. And finally, Google is very public cloud focused, like Amazon. Right? Again, no installed on-premises space to build from, so not terribly surprising. You know, I focused primarily on just a few of the most fundamental and most commercially important aspects of public cloud platforms. Let me just take a minute to show you some of the others. Because as you go across these three big platforms, there are these strong similarities. They're targeting the same kinds of markets. You know, this is what happens as markets mature. Products converge into very similar offerings, and that's what's happening here. So all these platforms offer Hadoop. They all offer machine learning, and so on. On Azure, the Hadoop and Spark offerings are part of HD Insight. The machine learning is called Azure Machine Learning, and now there's more added to that this week. Data warehousing, SQL Data Warehouse is for relational data. Data Lake is for unstructured data. And for visualization, that's Power BI. In Amazon's world, the Hadoop Spark technology is called EMR. Machine learning is called Amazon Machine Learning, unsurprisingly. You know, this is interesting. Microsoft's Azure Machine Learning provides a nice GUI to use, provides a whole bunch of algorithms, provides a bunch of ways to cleanse your data. It's a reasonably complex product. It assumes that you are, if not a full-tilt data scientist, at least willing to come to grips with some of the core aspects of data science, and gives you nice tools for doing that. Amazon's approach is totally different. Amazon's approach assumes that you are a developer who knows basically nothing about k-means algorithms and neural nets and so on. Their approach is so darn simple that they even choose the algorithm for you for machine learning. Which one is better? I don't know. But they're different. It's interesting taking different approaches here. Their relational data warehouse technology is called Redshift. They have no direct analog to Data Lake. Visualization, this is a brand new thing from them, QuickSight. At Google, they have Cloud Data Proc, which does the Hadoop, Spark stuff, Cloud Machine Learning, and more as well. BigQuery for their relational data warehouse, and Cloud Data Lab, also a new offering for doing Power BI type visualization. So these comparisons I'm doing here, at least listing the technologies, could spread out quite a bit further than I have done so far. All right, one more. Let me fill up the last row of my table. Salesforce. So, Salesforce has a platform called Force.com. And Force offers a PaaS technology and effectively a NoSQL database. They don't usually call it that, but it really is a NoSQL database. So on the one hand, you could look at this and you could say, well, gee, they're a lousy competitor. They offer so little compared to Microsoft, Amazon, and Google. How can this be? They look on this graph like they'd be uncompetitive, but they're not, and here's why. They're not uncompetitive because Salesforce is playing a different game, and they're playing it quite well. The game they're playing looks like this. Salesforce, as I'm sure you know, is primarily an app vendor. They sell CRM. They have the largest market share for CRM today. And so here's what they do. They say you ought to use Force.com, our cloud platform, as an adjunct to our CRM app. What they say is this. They say, listen, customer, you're using our CRM. All of your data about your customers is in the cloud, in our cloud, they say. Doesn't it make sense that if you're going to build applications that use that data, that those apps should also run on our cloud platform? It's a good argument. And what they then do is the following. They provide dev tools for building apps aimed squarely at the enterprise. In fact, you can do a lot with just point and click. Salesforce is often listed as a leader in the no-code Magic Quadrants for Gartner. So they've got this very different approach, going to enterprise customers, and giving them these easy-to-use tools. If you want, you can use Apex, a Java-like language Salesforce invented to write real code, but you don't have to. So what happens when you do this? What happens is you are utterly locked into Salesforce, right? You have Salesforce tools and languages in a database, and so you have a very hard time moving away. And I got to tell you, people, there is no lock-in like cloud lock-in. Because with on-premises software, if I buy it and then just keep on using it, I keep on running it on my machine, right? In the cloud, though, they send me a bill every month. If I stop paying, they shut me down. So there's no lock-in like cloud lock-in. When I talk to people who are using Force.com to build custom apps, and I ask them about this, I say, you know, you are totally locked in. Totally. If you'd built, say, a Linux app using MySQL on Amazon, wanted to move that to Azure or Google, well, it's doable. They all support Linux and Windows and MySQL and all those things, right? If you build here, you're locked into this world. But when I talk to users who do this, I describe this, they say, David, what is your point? They just don't care. They say, we're soaking to Salesforce CRM anyway, it makes no difference. So the thing to realize here, I believe, is that while it can look like Force.com is a lousy competitor here, they're playing a different game. In a very real sense, they are not a competitor to Amazon, Microsoft, Google. Those guys are very clearly the big three in this world today. Especially Amazon and Microsoft. Google's a bit behind, as I've said. So what about these other vendors that have been so important in enterprises for so long, like IBM? I've been saying that what we are seeing here is the rise of a new default platform. This is how we are going to build apps and run apps going forward. This is how new stuff is done. This, over time, maybe a long time, is going to replace what we have. And what that means is the dominant vendors that you have may change as well. So IBM, who is a fine company, I believe. They were a client of mine for many years. Fine company. IBM has had some challenges here. IBM began with these half-hearted cloud initiatives they had away. And then around 2012, 2013, Gartner in the IaaS-MQ put IBM not just in the losers quadrant, no, in the lowest, darkest, deepest corner of the losers quadrant. It was sad. So what did IBM do? They bought somebody. They bought SoftLayer in mid-2013. The SoftLayer was half hoster and half cloud provider. So they would say, IBM would say, that with us you can get not just cloud VMs, you can get bare metal as well. Interesting. What's happened since then is that IBM has moved a little bit into the visionaries quadrant in the Gartner IaaS-MQ, but they really face big challenges. They face big challenges. I talked earlier about this leaders-losers dynamic, the scale factor. Well, being a leader, having that massive scale, requires deep, deep pockets. And so Amazon, Microsoft, Google, deep, deep pockets. IBM's business is shrinking. Their revenue has been going down for the last couple of years. IBM announced a while ago that they were going to spend $1 billion on their cloud data centers. It got a bunch of press, $1 billion. And then IBM said, and we're going to spread that across 24 data centers. And you have to understand the scale here. Microsoft spends $1 billion to build one data center. So the scale is just so enormous. And given the lead that Amazon, Microsoft, Google have, it's really hard to see where IBM gets the money and everything else it needs to compete successfully and fully in this space. I have to say that I'm skeptical that they have a strong future in the public cloud platform business. And speaking of skeptical, let's talk about VMware. VMware, as you know, has all but owned, that's not quite true, has had the largest market share in on-premises virtualization for a long time, for Windows, right? Long time. And so it might seem natural that they should have a powerful position in the cloud era as well. But here's what's happened. VMware originally tried to get hosters to offer IaaS, VMs on demand, makes sense, they're called VMware, right? They're focused on VMs. They try to get hosters to offer vSphere-based IaaS on hoster hardware. But by and large, the hosters said, I don't want to do this. There wasn't great uptake of that. So next, VMware did this. They created something called vCloud Air, where they were running vSphere software on their own hardware they controlled anyway. They offered this themselves from their data centers. Well, they're offering IaaS, and remember, they're IaaS focused, so with vCloud Air, they partner with Google for other cloud services like object storage, because VMware is VM focused. They were doing IaaS. And here's what happened. They found that running IaaS, vSphere-based IaaS in their own computers also did not attract many customers. So they sold that business earlier this year, and now they have a new project underway. That project you might have heard about, it's called VMware Cloud for AWS. Here's what they're doing. They're now they're offering vSphere-based IaaS on Amazon hardware. So this is important. They treat Amazon as a hoster. VMware runs on Amazon boxes, Amazon servers, in Amazon data centers, but it's wholly disjoint from the rest of AWS. They're just a hoster. And so when you buy VMware Cloud on AWS, you go to VMware. They sell it to you, they send you the bill, they support it. It's a VMware service that's running on AWS physical servers. This puzzles me in several ways. The biggest one is this. This is the same thing they've done twice before, offering vSphere-based IaaS on public hardware. With hosters, there wasn't much success. With their own servers, not much success. Running on AWS, it's still the same thing. I don't understand why they believe this time is going to succeed, because it's the same service they've been doing for several years in multiple iterations. I'm puzzled by that. I'm also puzzled by something else. there's really no connection between VMware on Amazon and Amazon itself. There's one benefit. One benefit is you're in the same data center. So if you're doing VMware to AWS, you've got a fast link in the same data center. But if I'm doing VMware-based VMs and also Amazon-based VMs, I'm doing projects on both of them, I'm going to realize really quickly that Amazon's a whole lot cheaper than VMware. And so I'm not quite clear on their strategy here. I don't know. We'll see what happens. I'm also puzzled by something else, which is the hybrid cloud story. VMware will sometimes describe what they're doing as hybrid cloud. But you remember, one useful way to view hybrid cloud is with these 4 different areas I've talked about. And I talked earlier about the various things that Microsoft offers there. In compute, for example, there's IaaS and CaaS and so on. VMware is an IaaS provider. So from this perspective, they provide just a little tiny subset of the overall set of services that make up hybrid cloud. I'm a bit surprised to see them talking about hybrid cloud. But anyway, we'll see what happens here, as always. What's happened with Gartner, if you're interested, is that Gartner actually took VMware out of the IaaS Magic Quadrant when they announced this. But they were down there in the niche players area prior to that. All right, one way to think about this, it's kind of interesting, is to think about these various providers of public cloud platforms in 2 dimensions. One dimension is their strength in the cloud. The other is their traditional enterprise strength. And so there are vendors, Amazon, Google, Salesforce, that have great strength in the cloud, but of course don't come from enterprise backgrounds. They're not traditionally strong players in the enterprise. They're making progress, certainly, but they don't have the background of, say, an IBM or a VMware. Those guys have strong enterprise credentials from the past, but not much going on in the cloud. The single most unique thing about Microsoft's role, I would argue here, is that they're here. They're the only vendor that's got traditional enterprise strength and has cloud strength as well. In fact, and this is surprising to me, this is really surprising to me, of all the traditional enterprise platform vendors, the big guys who comprised your default platform previously, Microsoft is the only one that seems to be navigating this transition to the cloud effectively. And by effectively, I mean profitably, successfully. And I'm puzzled by that. It must be a very hard thing to do. To watch it happen, it doesn't seem so hard. But to see what's occurring here, it must be a very hard thing to do. You know, people diss Steve Ballmer periodically. I will never diss Steve Ballmer, in part because of this. Because getting there required Microsoft to make decisions 10 years ago to spend billions of dollars in the cloud that were very risky. And Ballmer made those decisions. It was the right thing to do. Don't we work in the most interesting business in the world? I think so. Fascinating stuff here. This talk is about the big picture, so I want to end once again with the big picture. But this time, I want to go back to this diagram I started with and look at it in a little bit more detail and walk through all the vendors. Because once again, you're making choices that will define your platform, your enterprise compute platform, for a long time to come. That platform, I would argue, contains these 3 big areas: clients, your SaaS applications, and public cloud platforms. But all of those break down into smaller chunks. So, for example, as we've seen, public cloud platforms have a whole bunch of aspects: IaaS and PaaS and SQL databases and identity and all kinds of stuff, right? SaaS applications come in many flavors, certainly. Email, collaboration like SharePoint, productivity, CRM, ERP, all sorts of things over there. And the clients are primarily phones, tablets, and PCs, laptops. I want to walk through the vendors I've talked about and plug their technologies into this diagram. Because to me, this is a useful way to think about what is happening across our industry in creating this new default platform. So, this is Ignite. Let's start with Microsoft. As we've seen, they've got this fairly complete set of services for Azure, for public cloud platform. For SaaS applications, they've got the Office 365 things, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Office Online. They've got Dynamics 365 for CRM and ERP and stuff like that. So a reasonably complete set of offerings there. This should not be surprising. Microsoft is the world's largest software company. So you would expect them to have a complete set of offerings in this space, would you not? For clients, they have one story. It's Windows 10 for everything. I think it's fair to say, or at least I believe, that Microsoft wishes they had more market share in the phone market. Would you agree? Yeah? I want to ask, who in the room had a Windows phone? Don't be ashamed, raise your hand, it's okay. Who had a Windows phone? Right, okay. Who still primarily has a Windows phone? Okay, a couple of you, I admire that, right? Because here's the thing, right? I loved my Windows phone. I've got an iPhone now, it's fine, a lot of apps, okay. But I so miss the Windows Phone user interface. Because come on, the iPhone and the Android phone, they float these icons in all of its wasted space. I really miss my big fat tiles on the Windows Phone. I mean, what kind of world is it when Microsoft has a better UI and lower market share than Apple? What's wrong with our world? How can that be? All right. Amazon in this world looks like this, as we've seen, broad cloud platform. Notice the gap in identity there. Let me explain that. What I mean by that is not services to control access to your own platform. They have that. Amazon has something called IAM to control access to Amazon services itself. What I mean is trying to be the Active Directory for the cloud world, providing single sign-on to everything, SaaS applications, cloud platforms, everything. Azure Active Directory aspires to do that. Amazon does not, which surprises me. Azure AD's biggest competitors are firms like Okta, who are actually on the show floor here. They're not Amazon. In applications, Amazon's made some steps there, Workmail, not too much. In clients, they've made some steps. They've got Kindle Fire, right? But they're mostly focused on public cloud platforms. Now, given their willingness to be a conglomerate, I wouldn't be surprised if they chose to enter these markets. But thus far, they've not made giant forays into any parts of this new default platform other than the cloud platform. Google has a somewhat broader story in some ways than Amazon. They also have a public cloud platform. Again, like Amazon, they do not try to be a directory service for the internet, for the global SaaS environment. So that's why I have the box for identity empty there. They're not like Azure AD in that way. For applications, they have a lot of stuff, clearly. Gmail, Google Docs, a variety of things. And for clients, well, they've had some success. Chrome, Android's got some market share, I'm told. So Google here has a fairly full portfolio. With Google as an enterprise platform, the overriding concern has always been what I said before. It's always been, are they serious? Do they really want this market? Do they really care? Or will they somehow perceive all of this as a way to get more search advertising? I don't know. We'll see. Salesforce, well, they're not really trying, right? They're playing this other game, playing it quite well. They've got this focused public cloud platform built primarily around an app, a CRM app, a SaaS app, and not addressing the client side. Let me be clear here. When I show no clients here, I'm not suggesting that Salesforce doesn't have client software. Of course it does. What I mean is they don't compete in the market for client infrastructure, operating systems. They're an app. They live as an app. That's what I mean. And then IBM, right, who have been, of course, a major part of the default platform. They basically owned it in the 70s and 80s, most of the 90s, played a big role for a long time after that. Going forward, it looks less clear what they're going to do. Their public cloud platform, software, has some pretty cool technologies, right? They've got virtual server, they've got Bluemix, which is an interesting PaaS technology. They've got object storage. They bought Cloudant, this NoSQL database a while ago. interesting technologies. Not as full and complete as you see in Microsoft, Google, Amazon, but they have stuff. They also have Watson, which is their big artificial intelligence brand that's doing very interesting things, as I'm sure you know. So they have some strengths here. As I said earlier, they have some substantial weaknesses as well, some really big ones. So I'm, again, skeptical of how big a role they'll play in the general default platform world. Because in the app space, in the client space, they're not competing. They're not really there. And finally, VMware. Now, VMware Cloud on AWS, they have a tiny piece of this. They're offering IaaS, and that's basically what they're doing. So, hard to see a great future for at least this part of their business in the new default platform. And with that, we're almost done. Let me reiterate here. We are seeing a huge change in enterprise platforms. Everything is changing at once. The clients have changed. Where we write and how we write custom apps has changed. How we purchase, access, and pay for packaged apps has changed. They've gone to SaaS. These things have all changed at once. It's massive. It's amazing. It's really amazing. All of us are choosing our partners for this new world. Choosing the right partners for cloud platforms, our focus here today, is really important. And once again, I encourage you to think of this as being like a marriage. I was in Latin America. I was in Bogota, Colombia, a little while ago. Met with the CIO and his direct reports. And we discussed cloud platforms. And I asked him, they'd chosen one, I asked him, how did you choose your cloud platform? And the CIO said, I have no idea, ask my tech guy. Bad sign right away, bad sign. This is a really important decision. CIOs should not delegate this to some tech guy. So a tech guy was there. I said, so how did you choose? He was the head of development for the organization. And what he said was this. He said, well, you know, we tried the two big leading ones. And this one, to create a new VM, took 4 minutes. This one for a new VM took 2 minutes. So we chose that one. This is bad. This is just bad. Because choosing based on such limited ephemeral feature advantages is not the way to go. The way to go is to understand what you're looking for in the long term. Work out which vendor best matches that and choose that option. Making choices based on ephemeral things like features, I would suggest, is not a great idea. And so, my final thought, I encourage you, no, I implore you, take this decision seriously. Thank you.